Okay, we are on Perek Yud Aleph, chapter 11 of Hilchos Gerushin. We're going to go through a couple of interesting conversations here. The first part of the Perek of the chapter is going to deal with what's called miyun at length. Then we're going to deal with the conversation of a machzir kushase achar shenisas, and then a few other kind of things at the end. What does that mean? Miyun is the fact that when a girl at a young age is married off by her family, not necessarily her father, because her father is a Torah right, but a brother or a mother, perhaps, or others in the family, she has a way out by not even having to deal with a get, with the whole divorce that we've been talking about until now. The Rambam puts it here because it's the same kind of idea of ending a marriage. And now we're going to learn about that and how that works and what it entails and what are the ramifications. Halacha Aleph, number one. Ein noisin kitana. Number one, the Rambam says the reality is you should not marry a girl who's considered a kitana. We're going to get into some of the ages in the next page or two as well. But a kitana is a young girl. V'hanoisi kitana yisoima. But if somebody goes ahead and marries an orphan girl below the age, when she's a katan still, she's still young. All she has to do is this concept of what we call miyun and leave. Get, she does not need a divorce. Because the kiddushin, the marriage acceptance of a kitana, of a young girl, is not a halach, is not a Torah accepted kiddushin. So here's the situation in short. Now, the Torah seems to have allowed a girl, particularly if she's what we see here, a Yasam, she's an orphan, to go ahead and get married so somebody would take care of her. She no longer has a father, or perhaps her family situation is such that they no longer have the ability to take care of her. So the Torah said, fine, we'll allow her to get married to somebody, we'll take her in and care for her, and eventually she will mature and grow old in that house, and then she'll be a proper age and a proper marriage. But what happens when this young girl says, you know what, I'm not enjoying this situation, I want out? So the Torah says, in the scenario where she is an orphan, that means she doesn't have a father marrying her off, or her mother or brother married her off, she could just say, I'm done. And we're going to learn the details of what she says on the next page as well. If her father married her off, it's a bit of a different scenario because the Torah does allow that. But her father married her off and then he passed away. Or in this case, it's not that she passed away, but she went ahead and she was widowed or divorced, so to say, from this husband of hers. We treat her like she's a widow, and therefore her father, even though in this scenario he's still alive, has no further authority or jurisdiction over her. If she married again while she's still a katan, still a younger age, she can once again do mamamena. She can do this concept of miyun and just say, I'm done, and walk out of here. Halacha beis. Someone who's deaf, a lady who's deaf, even though the Torah does not discuss her kiddushin, but the Chachamim allowed her to get married. The sages allowed her. Nonetheless, they did not set up the situation of allowing her to do this concept of miyun, that all she has to do is say, I'm done, and walk out. Why? So people should not refrain from marrying her. The whole reason the Chachamim set up the concept of marrying her is she should have someone to take care of her. But if the guy is concerned that I'm going to take her in and take care of her and she's going to just one day get up and walk out, that's not worth for me to, so to say, invest. I want to make sure that this is a proper relationship, etc. So the Chachamim did not enact this concept of miyun, while they did enact the concept of kiddushin and allowed her to get married. Gimel, number 3. This ketana, this young girl, can go ahead and do this miyun. And again, we're going to get more of the details of the miyun on the next page. And assume whether she was just engaged from the betrothed or whether she's married. Whether she's in front of her husband, whether she's not in front of her husband. Just like she could do this meal to her husband, she could do it to a yibum. That means if she ends up marrying her husband's brother because her husband passed away and they had no children, so she'd have to go to the concept of yibum, which we'll learn about in the next set of halachot. But we've already discussed it a little bit. She has to marry her brother. Nonetheless, she can still do meal. And if she's a katana, if she's underage, she could say, I'm done. And she could do miyun for one husband, get married again, and do miyun again, and they marry a third. Even many times the Rambam says, as long as she is a ketana, she's still young, she has this concept of miyun that she can say she's done.
Rabbi?
Yes.
If she wants to annul her relationship to a yavam, is that after yibum or before?
That's probably after they already miyabim. And the Rambam saying in a normal case, she would need a get. Here she can still do miyun. There's no difference whether it was a husband through kiddushin or a husband through yibum.
Okay, thank you.
Kozman shikatana yishlaman. The Rambam says anytime she's considered young, she can do this miyun. Ukitana shloi manav bishin yisua. And the Rambam says, here's an interesting scenario. You have a young girl, and she got married through her, say her brother married her off to a person. She's still young. She never said a word that she doesn't like the relationship. She's never enacted the miyun situation that we're talking about. But what did she do? She went ahead and accepted a ring from someone else to become married to them. Now here's normally if you're married and you accept kiddushin from someone else, it doesn't count because you're married, right? Here, what do we do? So the Rambam says it's considered that she went through the miyun because kiddusheha hein mi'uneha. That the kiddushin, the fact that she's saying I want to accept to be married to somebody else means I'm not happy where I am and I want out, and that's all she needs to do. She doesn't have to physically, rather verbally express it. She just did some action that expressed it for her. Dalit, number 4. Until what age can a girl do this immune ceremony? While she's a katana, until she becomes a nara. Until we know she's an island. So if you remember, in the last halachas of Isur Bia, at the very beginning, the Rambam gave us a bunch of definitions. One of katana is up to a certain age, a nara is another age, an islandess is another age. So here's the Rambam is going along and saying that a katana is basically up to 12. A nara is from 12 to 13, and 12 and a half a year, the Rambam says there. An islandess is usually at the age of 20, when we know that she cannot have children based on her physical scenario. So in other words, as long as she is a katan, until she becomes a nara, or until we know she's reached the stage of islandess, at either of those points, she can go ahead and do this concept called miyun. But medvar mamorim, what are we discussing? When does it apply that she's still considered a katana, young? Kolzman, as long as her husband was not intimate with her, did not have relations after she turned 12. If she turned 12 in Nivola and they had relations, since Be'ila, being physically intimate with someone is one of the ways of Kiddushin, she can no longer do the miyun process because now she's already married Minat Torah when she's past the age of 12. And you don't need to check. Now, if you remember, we learned that at 12 years old is really that she had what we call simanim. Simanim means certain signs of maturity. If she doesn't have the signs of maturity, technically, even at age 12, she's still not considered old enough. So the Rambam says you don't need to go do an investigation to see whether she had these signs of maturity. We accept it as a rule that when she turned 12, she had the simanim. She has the signs of maturity. The fact that she's not been together with her husband in an intimate way shows that they've been koinim in Atera, They had absolute kiddushin, proper kiddushin, and therefore now would be a get like any other married couple. Hey, what happens if they did search? They did not search, they did investigate. They did not find these signs of maturity. Since they were intimate after a time when it was right for her to have these signs, we're concerned that maybe, and this was discussed then at length as well, that maybe she had them and Vinishu, they fell off, they were removed, etc. Therefore, she needs a get from Suffolk out of doubt, because perhaps she's actually married. And if she, after we investigated, even though we didn't find, but we say it's a suffix, it's a doubt. What happened? She went ahead and accepted kiddushin and marriage from someone else. So then she needs to get from the second husband as well, out of doubt. Ve'im nisas, and if she went ahead and married the second husband, she has to leave both the first husband and the second husband. The Havlat Safik Mamzer Mishleim, and if she had a child, it's a doubtful child if there's an illegitimate child, because perhaps she was married at one point and became married to another person. So she can't be married to two men and have a legitimate child. But we don't know for a fact her situation, so we say it's all an in-doubt situation.
Rabbi?
Yes.
I have a question. I mean, we described a deaf person or any person who physically, doesn't understand what's the meaning of a marriage in Kiddushim. But when you talk about somebody who's 12 years old, it's also a child. So I try to understand what she understand in this kind of situation, some consequence, because when we go after all this, it's a lot to understand the meaning of marriage, and consequently, what happened if you divorce and all this. My question is, mentally, somebody who 12 years old or 12 and a half does have this capacity to understand of this. So I'm confused.
So here's, I think, the point. In the very beginning of the paragraph, we mentioned that the Rambam says you should not marry a young girl. You should not marry someone under the young age. The Torah does allow the father to marry off the daughter, and does allow the family to marry off this young daughter. Now, many times, as mentioned then, it could be that she was widowed, orphaned, rather she was orphaned, or it could be that the family situation is not good. And they feel that if they marry her off now, somebody will take her in and care for her, with the intention of caring for her now as a child. And eventually, when she turns 12, 13, 14, 15, she'll become an adult. And then they'll continue as a proper marriage.
But it's additional condition. It's I understand, but it's something additional too. But definitely, if you establish some rules can be much more strict regarding, okay, until age this, you cannot, because you're not mentally, let's put, not physically, mentally, capacity to understand everything what represent the marriage. So I believe in this condition, it's additional condition too, to help somebody, but it doesn't clear.
I don't think halacha is arguing with you. Halacha says don't do it, but halacha allowed for it in such a way for her benefit. Now, if it's not to her benefit, she can just stand up, and that's the whole new process we're learning about, and say, I'm done, and walk out of this. We don't hold her there against her will, because we're not sure that she understood what she got into. She's not sure she would understand how to get out of it with all the laws of get, etc. But we don't demand all of that. The bar is set much differently for her. But ultimately, there is a reason why we would have allowed it in those days in certain times. But even with that, the very first line of this entire chapter is don't do it. Okay. So you're right. The capacity level mentally is obviously not there as a child, which is why we say that the Kiddushin is not a real Kiddushin, and therefore it can have this process of getting out of it so simply. Once it becomes a real Kiddushin, we can't do that. You need a get. So therefore, if she's over 12 or 13, etc., and she continues to live with her husband, we now say now she's already reached the age of a physical understanding. So you're going to tell me maybe 12 doesn't, fine. But for the moment, most of this is focused on the under 12, under 13-year-old, or perhaps up to 20 for the Islander situation that he mentions, up to 20 years old even, but not physically there enough. But you're correct. They understood that the Kiddushin is not a real Kiddushin, and therefore they allowed this process to get out as well.
But Rabbi,
Yes.
so with the arranged marriage and the child is, let's say, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, living at home, etc., it's arranged marriage, can she annul the marriage even at that time?
Yes.
So she has the right to say, I don't want to.
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
And
Okay.
we're going to learn a little bit more about what that means, exactly what she has to say, how she says it, etc. But yeah, and as we just read before, if she doesn't even say anything, but she says, I meet somebody else who I like, or maybe someone who I love, for whatever understanding she has, and I want to marry them, and this person says, I want to marry you. Here's a marriage ring. Here's a I want to betroth you with this ring, etc. And she accepts it. That's already a statement. She's not happy with the first scenario.
Rabbi,
Okay.
I have a question. The concept, a religious concept about engagement as it is. One, the woman accept the ring. And before anything else, what's the level of the commitment she exactly?
So I'm going to give you an answer. Then I think we should try to go back to the chapter, because this is kind of running a little bit on a tangent. The concept of engagement that we have today is not the engagement that we're talking about throughout here. When we say the word erusin, a betrothal, and you betrothing the lady with a ring, it's a different concept. You make a statement in front of witnesses. There should be a cup of wine. There should be a process that happens there. And then there is a real commitment. Now, you're not completely married yet, and you're still not allowed to live together until you do the second part of the ceremony, which is called the Nisuin, which is what on the Sheva Brachot and the rest of them. But technically, there is some level of commitment. An engagement that we do today, we don't say the formula, we don't officially have witnesses, and we're not intending it. But I will tell you that it becomes really problematic today when people set up a whole scene before they propose, and they have a number of people standing there watching, and he says, will you marry me? And she says yes. That you could start to run into a conversation of that engagement already deserves more if you're going to break up than just saying goodbye. And it's a big issue. And that's why in a number of communities, I'll take Chabad for an example, because I know that prefers them, we don't give a ring at the engagement, because we don't want to be creating a scene that could create a commitment that then later on, if you break up, what do you do? How do you deal with it? Trust me, by the way, for those who are wondering, my wife did get a diamond ring. We just got it after the chuppah. I give it to her after the chuppah instead of at the engagement. But we do that deliberately, not to create one of those scenarios. So again, we use the term engagement, but the erusin, the betrothal, is not really the engagement of today necessarily.
Okay, clear. Thank you.
My pleasure. All right. Where are we up to here?
Number 5.
I believe it is, right?
Fine.
6. Ketana Shleimina Vihidila, a girl who was a young girl, got married, and she did not contest it. Even though she was not intimate with her husband after she turned 12, she no longer can do this meal because she's now grown up. But you only need a get from the sages. Why? Because they were not together as husband and wife after she became an adult. Shema hivia simanim v'tia safek mikadeshes. So therefore, we're not sure if she married because they were not really together. On the other hand, she's now an adult saying I'm married. So therefore, we demand a get from Suffolk. If they lived, without a doubt, if they lived together as husband and wife, then they would absolutely need a get, a divorce, because they're like any other married couple. The two of them have not come together, husband and wife, to be considered an absolute married couple. So the only relationship that the relationship is really based on getting married to a katan, which we know it doesn't have when she's young, doesn't have absolute kiddushin strength. So therefore, it's a doubtful what happens here. Now, what's the implication of that? Therefore, in this scenario, if she turned old, 13, 14, but she was never together with her husband, let's say he was off on a business journey for last year in those days, right? And then she went ahead and accepted a kiddushin from somebody else. So if she'd been married properly, we'd say that doesn't count because you're married. If she had been a katan, a child, we'd say it does count and she's free to marry the second. Here we're in this doubtful situation. We see that the kiddushin of the second person is valid. And therefore, if the first one will give her a suffix get, will give her this divorce paper, she could go live with the second. But if the second one says, here's a get, I'm done, we're done, she cannot go back to live with the first one. Why? That she was returning to her divorcee after she was engaged, betrothed to somebody else. We're going to learn in the second part of the chapter that there's a particular mitzvah in the Torah that says, if you get divorced, you're allowed to remarry your husband, the same person, the same spouse you got divorced. If you get divorced and one of you gets in, particularly the scenario here, we're talking about she went ahead and got married to someone else, then got divorced from the second husband, she is no longer allowed to remarry the first. Torah says clearly you're not allowed to remarry your first husband if you've been married in between. Here we have a doubt in this whole scenario, so we say it's better not to go back to the first husband because it will look like you were married to somebody else in the middle and then you went back to the first, which would not be allowed. What if the second one lived with her as husband and wife before the first one gave the divorce? So then she should go ahead and leave both of them. Because then it seems like someone whose husband, we put out a rumor that her husband died. She went ahead and got remarried based on that concept. My husband died. I'm a widow. I got remarried. But then the husband shows up. That means he never really died. It was just a rumor. What's the halacha? The halacha is you have to leave both of them. You have to leave the first because you already got married to the second. You have to leave the second because you were never allowed to be married to the second all along. But ultimately, the child from the second one, in this scenario, is not an illegitimate child. But if the first one comes back to live with her before the second one divorces her, then it would be an illegitimate child because the second kiddushin has more chance of being a viable, proper one because she was older. So back and forth, and whether this actually happens or how it plays. But the moral of the story is that she should not find herself kind of swinging between two people, if you wish, saying, well, the first one I kind of never really got married to because I never was intimate with, even though I lived with, but I never said I was done. And the second one, therefore, she shouldn't marry because she still was the first. And this back and forth kind of scenario really shouldn't take place. 7. What is a katana? What is the age that we're talking about? From 6 until 10, we talk to her and see how good how competent, mentally competent she is. If she knows what's the test, that the husband gives her a ring, and she takes this ring, and she knows to hold on to it because it's special, that it's something special. Lo shetishmar oisan, the Rambam says something fascinating here. Not that she's watching it and guarding it. A little child, you give a nut or you give a date. In those days, those are big delicacies, right? So you give her a nut or a date and she holds on to it, but she doesn't pay that much attention because she knows it's always going to get more. But if she holds on to the ring differently than she holds on to the nut and the date, that tells us she understands that this ring represents something greater. Then she needs to do miyun. She needs to do this process of walking away with miyun. But if she doesn't understand even that much, and I think this goes back to the question one you were asking a little bit earlier. If it goes back to her mental competence is such that she doesn't see the difference between a gold ring, a diamond ring, and a date. A real child doesn't get the difference. Then she doesn't have to go through any ceremony. She just gets up and goes home to her mother like nothing ever happened. When do we need a miyun in this process and to contest in a certain way? When she understands that she got married. She's able to see the difference between the ring and the date and say, this is special. Then we need to do some ceremony to undo it. But if she doesn't even get that, you could just go. And the Rambam continues, under the age of 6, even if she knows how to hold on to this ring, she doesn't have to do a miyun. And if she's older than 10, she needs miyun, even if she's not the brightest. Even if over than 10, she says, I don't get the difference between a ring and a date, you have to do miyun. So in other words, under 6, go home. Over 10, miyun must happen. Between 6 and 10, we have to see where her competence level is. And whenever the girl's brother or relative or mother married her off without her even knowing who the chassid is, who the groom is, or without any knowledge, also in the Srich Lamayan, they didn't even involve her enough to tell her to make an introduction. Then she could just also walk away or walk home. So you do see that they take into effect some of her understanding in this process as well. Ches. Now we're going to get to the actual ceremony. What does it mean to do miyun? To do this concept we're talking about. How do you do it? She says in front of 2 people, I don't want this husband. Or she says, I'm not happy with this marriage my brother or mother put me up to. In similar expressions. And even if she's sitting in her house, she's married to this husband, and there are a bunch of guests around the table. And she's helping to be a hostess. She's serving them. In the middle, she says, I'm not happy. I don't want this husband. That's good enough to count as meal. All we need from her is an expression. It doesn't matter if at this moment her actions show she's a hostess together with him. If she makes the expression, I'm done, I don't want to be here, she's done. So what happens? Test. To the 2 people who were sitting there at the table and heard her say this, they write a little note that says, on this and this day, so and so was Memai and went through this contesting of this child marriage to husband X, and they sign it and give it to her, and then she goes home. That is all the get meal, the divorce document for a meal needs to contain. The get meal, and the Rambam continues, can get the gerushin is new migireshes. That you don't have it like all the other details of a get, that whoever gives it to you, you have to give it in front of people. And you have to write it particularly, or giving it over. If you remember how details the Rambam said earlier, you got to write this word and that word and do it like this, and have 2 witnesses watch and 2 witnesses give, and all. None of that applies here. I get. And we don't even write the front formula of the get done. This is this day, so and so. We just write so and so said that she is done with her husband, and they go. Why is that? Shemi could get Gerushin. We don't want to confuse people to think it's an actual get and that she was actually married. Now, the implication of the difference between having an actual divorce, a get, and a miyun in this ceremony is a lot. We're going to get into some of them in a bit. So therefore, we don't want to confuse people to think that she had a get when she didn't. The two have to know her and know the husband. If somebody was sitting on the side and hears her say that to two people, he doesn't have to recognize when he writes it, but the two witnesses who hear it, they have to know the husband and the girl. And now the Rambam in 11 is going to share with us the classic formula of the get, and we're going to just go through it in the English because it's in Aramaic. On this day of the week and on this day of the month, and this year, according to the following time period, reckoning, so and so, the daughter of so and so, you put her father's name, issued a protest in our presence saying, my mother or my brother misled me and had me married or consecrated to so and so, the son of so and so. That's the husband. While I was a minor, I'm now making a statement in your presence that I do not desire, nor can I live with him. So that's her statement. I don't want him. I can't live here. We had so-and-so undergo a physical examination and established she is still a minor. Again, we want to make sure that her age and her competency and etc. that she fits this ketana. Hence, we have written and signed this legal document and given it to her to serve as support and evidence. Then so-and-so witness and so-and-so witness. And that's it. 12. Now we're going to switch a little bit. We're going to kind of come back to this meal, but now we're going to switch a little bit to the concept of if you were married once, got divorced, can you remarry? 12. If somebody divorces his wife and then she gets engaged, betrothed to another, even though she did not have relations, she did not consummate the marriage, if you wish, she is forbidden to go back to the first. And if the first husband takes her back and is intimate with her, he will get lashes. We will force him to divorce her, to send her out. Because the verse says that the first husband cannot take her back. So it's an avera. It doesn't. We can't let that continue. Yud Gimel 13. What happens if she ended up having promiscuous relations? She didn't get married. She got divorced from her first husband, and then she had an affair with somebody else. Then she could go back to her first husband. Then she should go out of her house, and she should be to another man. What does it mean she should be for another man? That means she should have kiddushin. She should have a proper marriage ceremony. That is what forbids her from taking him back, is that she had kiddushin to another person. So again, we don't allow her. We would say you're not allowed to go ahead and have this type of a promiscuous affair. But if she did, the first husband can still remarry her, and there's no avera. Yudalad 14 of Ichlal Lav Zen, included in this lav, this prohibition, Shekol Isha Shazintatachas Baila, Nesra Baila. That any lady who has promiscuous affair while married to her husband, she becomes usher to her husband. V'loika alaman should be punished. Shenamar acharei asher hutma. Because the verse says, after the fact that she's become tamei, that she had this affair and she had it. Unless she was the wife of a non-Kohen and she was raped. So in other words, if she willingly goes out to have an affair while she's married to her first husband, then she's not allowed to come back and still live with her first husband. How this plays out nowadays with various conversations is a long conversation, but this is how the Rambam lays down these halachas. Therefore, called Isha Shenesra al Bailai de Kinevistira. Any lady who's forbidden to her husband because her husband, and this is the laws of Sota, which we're going to learn later on at length, but the laws of Sota mean the husband looks at the wife and says, I forbid you to go hang out with a certain guy because I'm concerned that the two of you are becoming promiscuous together. And she goes ahead and hangs out with him again. And now they have to go through a whole ceremony at the Beis Hamikdash with water to attain if she's innocent or not. But if the husband takes her back during this process while it's unfolding, they get makas mardas. They get lashes from the rabbis. In any case, if he goes ahead and after divorcing his wife, whether it's because he felt that she was having an affair with someone else, he got fed up and got divorced. If he takes her back when he feels like kind of calms down, if you wish, he's not allowed to, because she's now been with somebody else in a different way. Tezvav, 15. Cheresh, shikirish virimiza. Someone who's deaf or mute, who's not able to speak, we've learned already in the earlier chapters that they could divorce through remiza, through like a sign language. And then she went ahead and got engaged, betrothed to another cheresh, another deaf mute. And for sure she got engaged to a healthy individual. She cannot go back to her first husband who was the deaf mute. But the wife of a mentally competent person who got divorced, and then she went ahead and married a deaf mute, and got divorced from the deaf mute, with Teres Lachsel, she can go back to her first husband. And the reason is, as we learned before, is that the Kiddushin for a Cherish is a Derabana, is only from the sages, but a Kiddushin of the regular one is Minatera, is from the Torah. And the reason why they allowed the Chachamim set up this kind of a Kiddushin is that people should marry them actually, and not leave them unmarried. But ultimately, in this scenario, it doesn't play out exactly the same. Tezayin, Hamama'ena 16, Hamamanis Be'ish, Enemy Gereshes Umenu. Here we're going to start talking about the differences if someone goes through Miyun or someone goes through Gerushin. If this young girl gets divorced through the process of Miyun or gets divorced through the process of a regular get, a regular divorce. The girl who goes through the Miyun as if she was never married and therefore never divorced. He can marry her relatives and she can marry his relatives. And here's an interesting one. She's allowed to marry a Cohen. Normally, a divorcee is not allowed to marry a Cohen. But since this Miyun process is not a divorce, she's now still allowed to marry a Cohen. And if she got married to someone and then went through this Miyun ceremony, if she gets Miyun from the first one, and then it goes ahead and marries the second one, whether it was proper Kiddushin was a proper divorce, or a proper Kiddushin and he dies, whatever the case is, she can go back to her first, because her first husband is not considered a husband who divorced her, like we just been saying, which would be forbidden to remarry. Her husband is someone who Miyun did that process, and that process doesn't count as a divorce. Not just that, the Rambam says. The Rambam says that even if that in a certain way, that if she was a first one, gave her a get and a miyun, since she was a miyun, since she was allowed to go through that process, it doesn't count even the fact that he wanted to give a get. Here's the punchline the Rambam says, that anybody who gets divorce through miyun process, get, even though there may have been a divorce, a get written before or not, as if they've never been divorced and they're allowed to remarry. So the moral of the story the Rambam's sharing with us here is that a get process causes some severe implications. Number one, you can't go back to the first husband. Number two, you can't marry a Kohen. A miyun does none of that. If a girl goes through the miyun process, she's allowed to marry someone else and then go back to her first one. She's allowed to now go marry a Kohen. It's as if she was never married. But if somebody goes ahead, the Rambam continues a different scenario and gives an actual get to a katana, and then she marries someone else. She's still a girl. She's still a katan, and she has a miyun by the second person. Asura lachzul rishon. Then she's forbidden to go back to the first. She asas mimenu begets, and she went away from him with a get. Even though miyun was by the second one, nonetheless, as the first one decided to do a get instead of miyun, which means, again, a get means that it comes from the husband. Miyun means it comes from the wife. So here, the first marriage ended because the husband said, "I'm done. I want to give a get that he can no longer take her back, even if the second one was just miyun." If the second one give a get, for sure. And she's also forbidden to the first one who gave the get to her, to all of the relatives, the father, the brother, etc., like any other case of someone who's divorced. 17. Now we're going to talk about Yibum for a minute. Somebody had asked about Yibum before. If a girl got into connected to a Yibum, and then she was mema'enet, she went through this miyun process, she's forbidden to marry this person she had been married to's father, because it looks like she was a daughter-in-law, and a daughter-in-law is not allowed to marry a father-in-law. But others, it is allowed. If she did go ahead and do miyun to one of the brothers through this yibum process, she can then marry one of the other brothers. Normally, through a get, you would not allow certain situations, but miyun you would. But the father-in-law, since it's too close, it looks like a daughter-in-law and a father-in-law, we put that in a separate situation. Yud Ches 18. Okay, now we're going to start a new concept, which is actually very practical. Miyun does not happen much today because nobody marries. No rabbi would marry a ketana today. If no ketana is getting married, miyun doesn't exist. Remarrying your first wife after you've been married to the second wife happens. It could happen today. You're not allowed to do it. Now we get into the second situation, another situation which is practical. If a lady gets divorced, she should not remarry for at least 90-day period. Why is that? So the Rambam begins in Yud Ches 18. Should not get betrothed or married for 90 days. Except not counting the day that she got divorced and that her husband dies. The chutz b'yom and not counting the day she gets engaged. So there's been 90 days in between the day of the divorce and the day of the next engagement. Why is that? In order for us to know she's pregnant. In order to know if this child belongs to the first husband or the second husband. Nowadays, we do a pregnancy test and you get that right away if someone's pregnant. But in the olden days, the only way to know was to go 3 months, and we showing 3 months, each and every period. 3 times not having something in halacha is considered a chazak. It's an established rule, and therefore we establish you don't have it, it must be because of pregnancy, number one. Also, by 3 months, maybe her body would have other physical changes that you would be aware of. But before the 3 months happened, we don't necessarily accept that she's pregnant because we just didn't know in those days. How this applies today is a contemporary halachic debate. Many still say you need to wait 3 months. Many will allow a pregnancy test in certain situations as well. And that's each scenario, each rabbi has to deal with situation. You test 19. I get my from the day you write the get, you start to count the 90 days. Tonight, even if it was on a condition, the condition is not going to take place or happen for another 2 weeks. Nonetheless, you count from the day of the get. Or they wrote the get today and then they shipped it off to go to the lady. And it took a time period. And the Rambam says even a couple of years till it gets to the lady. You count from the day of the writing of the get. Why? Because they're not going to be together intimately from the day he writes the get. Our only concern here is perhaps she became pregnant from him. She's not going to become pregnant from him if they're not going to be together from that day. Chaf. The Rambam continues. Even a lady who is not able to give birth, or even if she was divorced or widowed from a betrothal, which means they were not allowed to be together. They have to wait 90 days. And even a minor child or an postmenopause or someone who we know has been infertile, or an island is this with the person we said can't have children. And even if the husband has been away on a business trip, or he's been lying in bed in a hospital for 6 months, or he's been in jail for a sentence. Even a psula, a virgin, in other words, a proper marriage from the betrothal. The Chachamim say there's no differentiation. We do not start making differences in cases, say, yeah, no, because it becomes too complicated. So loy plug rabbana, the Chachamim, the sages made a decree and said no exceptions. Chaf Aleph, shifcha shenishtachra, v'kiryuri sheniskayra, a maidservant who was freed, so now she can get married. Or a convert who converts. You have to wait 90 days also to know whether the child is from when you were either made or not Jewish, or if the child is from now when you're free or when you're Jewish. And here the Rambam tells you something interesting, and I see this play out practically as a conversation, as a situation. But what happens if a couple converts? He and she both convert. You separate them 90 days. We separate them 90 days in order to know if this child was born after they converted or before they converted. And the same thing. And there are certain implications in Allah of why that would be interesting to know other than just the title. But the Yifas Torah was the lady, and we'll learn about this in the halach as a battle, that you were allowed to, in certain scenarios in battle, have relations with someone who you took as a captive, on condition that you then bring her home and marry her. But there's a time period that you had to take her home and allow her to kind of live on her own and grow her hair, grow her nails, etc. It's all conversation that we'll get to later in halacha. But here, even though the Torah says you cannot marry her for 30 days, and for 30 days she comes into your house and she has to sit there. And you have to rethink if this is doing the right thing to marry this girl you took in captivity or not. Nonetheless, the Chachamim still put into effect, the sages said, you still have to wait 90 days. That 30 days, that 30 days plus another 60 days. Because we don't know about the child. Chaf Beis 22. Someone who does meal in the Rambam says, now we're going back to what we started at the beginning of the chapter, does not have to wait. Like Gazriel Begrusha, the decree was only about a divorcee. And also a lady who is a harlot, a lady who does promiscuous relationships, doesn't need to wait. Because she is very particular to take care of herself not to become pregnant. And also a lady who was raped or she was seduced, which is another category within halacha of dealing with sexual assault and rape, etc., which again, we will learn these halachas later on in the Rambam, also does not need to wait 90 days. And 90 days was set up only for a grusha, for a divorcee. Chav Gimel, Misha Nisas Betois, if somebody got married by accident, V'noidish Yasur Labaila, and she found out that she was usher to her husband, that she's forbidden to be married. And the Bezin says you have to leave because you two are not allowed to be married. If she was a katana under the right age, under the age of being old enough for what we've been talking about, maturity, she does not have to wait 90 days. This is not a common scenario. The sages set up decrees only about commonplace scenarios. This is a very uncommonplace scenario that somebody should marry somebody who's a katana, a child who's not reached the level of mature of to be mature enough to get married, who's forbidden to be married to them. Chavdala 24. My area specifically should be so if somebody goes ahead and betroths a lady during these 90 days, he's supposed to be waiting 90 days from the first divorce. And instead, this guy goes over and gives her a ring to betroth her during the 90 days. But now we put him in cherem, we ostracize him. If he gave the ring and then he ran away to far away, a different country, whatever, we don't ostracize him. If he ignores the ruling, he goes ahead and gets married during these 90 days, then we separate them apart until the 90 days are over, and then they go on to live again like husband and wife. 25. Now we're switching a little bit, but once we're talking about who you're not allowed to marry because of the benefit of the child, to know if the child belongs to the first husband or not, we're going to talk about other people who shouldn't marry because of the benefit of the child. So the sages decree that you should not marry your friend's pregnant wife. So if a husband passes away or divorces his pregnant wife, someone else should not go ahead and marry her, or someone who's nursing their child, even though it's not a debate of saying whose child is it, she's clearly pregnant or she's clearly nursing. Because we're concerned about a pregnant child that the new husband may not care about this child that much. It's not his kid, and therefore may do something that may harm the child when being intimate with his new wife, because he's not that concerned about the child. Or perhaps that she will go through a situation where her milk would begin to dry up, and there's a process of buying certain medications and certain herbs, etc. The Rambam says that would help her regain her milk supply, but he doesn't want to do it because it's not his kid. So therefore we said, don't get married while you're nursing a child or you're pregnant. Let those situations play out. And then when you get married, the husband will be bringing in a quote unquote a normal situation with a stepson, a daughter, and they will be able to hopefully take care of it. Everything should be fine after that. Chavav 26 Kamuz Mana Yenika. How long is the time of nursing? Arpav Esrim Chodesh. 24 months. Chutz B'yom Shenolaboy B'yom Shetizaretz Boy. Minusing the day, except for the day rather the child's born, and except for the day that you're allowed to get engaged. So 24 months in between. Chav Zayin 27. Shem She'asel Lisa Kachasel Aretz Alachar Manzeh. Just like it's forbidden to get married, it's also forbidden to betroth her during this time period. What happens if she gives over her child to a wet nurse? She stops nursing him, she weans him or her the baby within 24 months. So now we don't have the concerns that you brought up earlier. Says the Rambam, no, you're still not allowed to get married. What if the child, God forbid, passes away within those 2 years? They're allowed to get married because we have no fear that he went out to kill the child in order to marry her. We're never going to say that. Once the child passes away, then there's a clear statement of why you can go ahead and get married. Chavches 28. If you went ahead and married a pregnant or nursing lady during this time period, beget, he has to give a get and go out. And even if he was a priest, a kohen. And if you stroll, you take her back. You wait, you divorce her, you wait out the time period either till she gives birth or the 24 month, and then you can remarry. Kohen can't do that. That's why the Rambam says, even nonetheless, a Kohen still has to go ahead and divorce. If he goes ahead and marries her and then runs away and doesn't live together, then later comes back after the time. Okay, we don't do anything to him anymore. He's already waited out the time. That's fine. Even though he shouldn't have gotten married. He got married, but he's not been around. We let it go. If someone betroths to a pregnant or to a nursing woman, we do not force them to give out. But we do not allow them to do the next part and get married until either the time of nursing passes, or if God forbid the child passes away, like we said before. So in other words, if you went ahead and betrothed a pregnant or nursing woman, even though you shouldn't, the Rambam says, nonetheless, we say fine, now go home and wait till the time period's over, and then you can get married happily and live, God willing, happily ever after. That's the end of the parak.